The night had fallen hard, swallowing the small town under a relentless curtain of snow. Streets that were usually warm with the glow of streetlights now lay silent, coated in white. The wind howled like a wild animal, rattling shutters and sending flakes whipping against the windows. It was a night that warned of danger, yet life, unpredictable and stubborn, was about to twist two strangers' paths together. Mark Tanner gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. His truck skidded slightly on the ice, forcing him to correct the wheel, the tires crunching over the frozen street. He was late, always late. But tonight, it didn't matter why. The snowstorm wasn't just a nuisance, it was a threat. Somewhere out there, he had to find her before the cold claimed its next victim. Earlier that evening, he had received a frantic call. A young woman stranded on the outskirts of town, trying to make it home after her car slid off the road. Her voice had been brittle, scared, almost breaking with every word. Mark, a man whose life had become measured in cautious steps and routines, had acted without thinking. He couldn't ignore a plea like that, not anymore. As he drove, memories of his own daughter flashed across his mind. Lily had been just 7 when the accident happened, and every day since had been a battle with absence. He had tried to fill his life with work, responsibilities, and the illusion of control. But loss had a way of breaking through even the tightest armor. And tonight that armor felt heavier than ever, as if the snow itself was pressing down on him, warning him not to fail. When he finally spotted the dim glow of headlights near a bend in the road, his heart skipped. There she was, wrapped in a thin jacket, shivering, her hair plastered to her face with frost. Mark leapt from the truck, boots crunching in the snow, and rushed toward her. "Are you okay?" he shouted over the wind, his voice both commanding and gentle. She flinched, but then relief spread across her features as recognition dawned. I think so," she stammered, her teeth chattering. Her arms were wrapped around herself, trying in vain to keep warmth from escaping her body. Mark didn't wait for more. He pulled off his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders, holding her close for a second longer than necessary to share the warmth. It wasn't just physical, it was a reassurance, a silent promise that she was safe now. "Let's get you to my truck," he said, helping her toward the vehicle. The snow was relentless, each step a battle, each gust of wind a warning. She stumbled once, and his hand caught hers instinctively. Their fingers brushed, and in that brief touch, there was a spark, a subtle connection neither expected. As they climbed into the truck, the warmth of the heater began to thaw more than just frozen fingers. Mark's eyes kept glancing at her, noticing the exhaustion etched into her features, the subtle tremble in her hands. She was more than just a damsel caught in a storm. There was a story here, one that begged to be understood, and a heart that, like his own, had been through too much to trust easily. The drive back toward town was tense. Snow swirled around the headlights, turning the road into a tunnel of white. Every crunch of tires over ice reminded Mark of the fragility of the moment, and of life itself. He wanted to ask questions, to uncover her story, but words felt fragile in the storm's roar. Sometimes action spoke louder than speech. Finally, they reached the cozy diner at the town's center. Its neon sign flickered through the blizzard like a beacon of hope. Inside, the warmth was immediate, the smell of coffee and fried food enveloping them. She pulled off the coat he had given her, and the chatter of patrons seemed to momentarily fade around them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small yet sincere, as if acknowledging not just his help, but something deeper. Mark nodded, hiding the surge of emotion that caught him off guard. "You're safe now. That's what matters." But as the waitress approached to help, her face paled at the sight of him. Not because he looked threatening, Mark was a stranger in a stranger's town, but because what she saw froze the whole diner. There, beneath the snow-dusted entrance and flickering neon lights, two worlds collided, and in that instant, neither of them would ever be the same again. The diner's warm light cocooned them, the storm outside a relentless reminder of the world's chaos. Mark watched her quietly, noticing the subtle tremor in her hands as she clasped her coffee cup like it was a lifeline. There was something fragile about her, a vulnerability that tugged at his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Emily, though he learned that slowly. She spoke hesitantly, words measured as if each one weighed 100 pounds. I don't usually go out in this weather," she admitted, a small smile tugging at her lips. But even in that simple statement, Mark sensed a history of struggle, a life burdened with obstacles that were invisible but heavy. For Mark, it was impossible not to reflect on his own past. He had once believed that love and warmth were constants in life, until the day the accident happened. Lily, his little girl, had been everything, a bright, laughing soul who could melt even the hardest of hearts. But the crash had taken her, leaving him in a world that suddenly seemed colorless. Nights became endless stretches of silence, mornings a ritual of survival rather than joy. Friends had reached out, tried to console, but grief had a way of isolating. Mark built walls around himself, convincing the world that emotions were dangerous. His heart, once tender, had become a fortress, frozen to protect against the unbearable ache of loss. Emily, on the other hand, carried her own battles. She had grown up with the weight of responsibility pressing down on her small shoulders. Her mother had fallen ill when she was barely a teenager, forcing Emily into roles she wasn't ready for. The diner job was a means of survival, not a dream. And yet she worked with a quiet determination that went unnoticed by most. Behind her soft smile lay nights of self-doubt, moments of exhaustion, and the lingering fear that life would never allow her to simply breathe. As they sat across from each other, the world outside the diner seemed irrelevant. Their conversations were gentle, cautious, but revealing. Emily spoke of small victories and quiet failures, of nights where hope felt like a fragile flame ready to flicker out. Mark listened more than he spoke, feeling a connection he hadn't anticipated. Here was someone who understood struggle, not through tragedy like his own, but through endurance, resilience, and a relentless fight to keep moving forward despite life's obstacles. At some point, the conversation turned to laughter, a brief, startling sound that seemed to surprise both of them. Emily shared a story about a customer who had spilled coffee on himself in the middle of a rush, and Mark chuckled genuinely, the sound foreign in his own ears but comforting. It was the first time in years that the heaviness in his chest lightened even slightly. Yet beneath the warmth, there were subtle cracks. Emily flinched at certain words, hesitated when asked personal questions, and often diverted her gaze. Mark, too, felt the familiar pull of fear, the instinct to protect his heart, to retreat into solitude where pain couldn't reach him. But the storm outside, and the storm within both of them, forced them to confront their vulnerabilities. Hours passed unnoticed. The blizzard raged on, but inside the diner, time felt suspended. Mark thought about the moments he had lost with Lily, the milestones never celebrated, the bedtime stories never told. And as he glanced at Emily, he realized that perhaps life had offered him another chance, not a replacement, not a cure for his grief, but a possibility for connection, for understanding, for shared warmth in a world that had often been cold and unforgiving. Emily, for her part, felt an unfamiliar comfort in his presence. There was no judgment, no expectation, only the quiet acknowledgement of her struggle. She found herself speaking of fears she rarely voiced aloud, the fear of being overlooked, of failing, of never being truly seen. Mark didn't offer cliches or quick reassurances. Instead, he listened, nodding, occasionally offering small insights, letting her know without words that she mattered, that her experiences were valid, and that someone genuinely cared. By the time the snow outside began to wane, a subtle transformation had taken place. Both carried the weight of past pain, yet both had experienced a moment of reprieve, a shared understanding that human connection could be a lifeline. The diner had become a sanctuary, a place where two people broken in different ways began to recognize the beauty in vulnerability. As they prepared to leave, Emily lingered for a moment, her hand brushing against the edge of the table. "Thank you. For tonight," she whispered. It was more than politeness, it was acknowledgement of safety, trust, and a bond beginning to form. Mark nodded, his own throat tight with emotion. Outside, the storm had lessened, though the snow still blanketed the streets in silence. They stepped out into the quiet, hearts slightly lighter, though the world remained unpredictable. In the distance, the neon sign of the diner flickered like a lighthouse, reminding them that even in the darkest nights, there could be warmth, connection, and the promise of hope. And as they walked toward their separate paths, both felt a subtle shift, a spark that neither could ignore. Perhaps, for the first time in years, the possibility of love, complicated, painful, yet beautiful, was beginning to feel real. The weeks that followed were quiet, deceptively normal, but underneath the surface, both Mark and Emily felt a subtle tremor in their lives, a tension that neither could fully name. They had grown accustomed to each other's presence, meeting occasionally under casual pretexts, a coffee at the same diner, brief walks through snow-dusted streets, or shared errands in the small town. Each encounter carried warmth, but also an invisible line neither dared to cross. Mark struggled more than he expected. The grief he carried was not an easy burden to lay down, and trust did not come overnight. He found himself hesitating in moments that demanded vulnerability. He wanted to reach out, to let Emily see the layers beneath his guarded exterior, but every attempt was met with a familiar wall of fear. He worried, irrationally, yet convincingly, that revealing too much would either frighten her away, or worse, show a weakness he couldn't bear to admit. Emily, too, battled her own demons. While Mark's pain was tangible, hers was quieter, internalized, often hidden behind smiles and polite conversation. She had spent years convincing herself that showing vulnerability would be dangerous, that being seen could be synonymous with being judged, abandoned, or hurt. Yet with Mark there was something different, a sense of safety she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Still, the old fears clung stubbornly, whispering doubts whenever emotions threatened to rise above the surface. It was a cold Friday evening when the first true test arrived. The diner was bustling, the warm glow of lights contrasting sharply with the icy streets outside. Emily was serving tables with practiced grace, moving swiftly, but exhaustion lined her face. Mark had dropped in unexpectedly, hoping to catch a quiet moment with her, unaware that life had decided to intervene in its own chaotic way. As Emily carried a tray of coffee past a corner table, a man at the far end, a regular known for his harsh temper, spilled his drink, slamming his hand onto the table in frustration. The room went quiet for a moment, patrons watching silently. Emily, flustered, tried to apologize and clean the mess, but the man's voice rose, sharp and demanding. "Watch where you're going," he barked. Mark felt a surge of protectiveness, a familiar instinct he had learned to suppress. He approached calmly but firmly. "It's okay. Accidents happen," he said, trying to diffuse the situation. But his presence, instead of calming, seemed to intensify the man's anger. Words escalated, and the diner was tense with anticipation, like a storm ready to break. Emily's hands shook as she apologized again, and in that moment Mark saw it. The silent fear she carried, the same fear he had felt for so long, now reflected in someone else's eyes. He wanted to shield her, to carry her away from all danger, but he also knew that protecting her physically would do nothing for the emotional battles she fought. The challenge was not just the man's anger, it was the invisible barriers they both carried, the past trauma that made confrontation so painful. After the incident, they stepped outside to the quiet of the snow-dusted street. The cold air was sharp against their flushed faces, but the tension between them was far more chilling. I shouldn't have let it upset me," Emily murmured, her voice trembling. "I can handle this. I always do." Mark shook his head gently. "You don't have to handle everything alone. That's what I'm trying to say." His words were soft but firm, carrying the weight of experience. But Emily's gaze dropped, her pride and fear mingling in a silent refusal to accept help fully. Over the following days, small misunderstandings tested them further. A missed call, a delayed message, an unspoken expectation, all became subtle fractures. Mark assumed she was pulling away. Emily assumed he was losing interest. Both carried unspoken fears. He feared losing another connection to grief. She feared giving her heart only to have it broken. Complicating matters, outside forces began to intrude. Friends of Mark, unaware of Emily's presence in his life, questioned his ability to move on. Rumors at the diner spread quietly, some benign, others critical, like whispers designed to sow doubt. Emily's co-workers, seeing her closeness with Mark, speculated and gossiped, intensifying her insecurities. And yet, in spite of the tension, there were moments of raw vulnerability that pulled them back together. A shared sunset, a quiet conversation about childhood dreams, a touch that lingered just a heartbeat too long, all reminders that beneath fear and misunderstanding lay something real, something worth fighting for. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside them, unpredictable, relentless, and full of hidden danger. Yet it also mirrored the one constant they had discovered, the need for warmth, for connection, and for courage to face fear head-on. Every obstacle, every misunderstanding, was not just a challenge to their bond, but an opportunity to confront the ghosts of their pasts, to prove that trust could be rebuilt and love could be nurtured, even in frozen hearts. By the end of this section, both Mark and Emily are pushed to the brink of retreat, their fears threatening to pull them apart. Yet the foundation of trust and subtle affection remains, poised to transform the moment they finally confront their deepest vulnerabilities, a moment that will arrive in the next section, the story's emotional climax. The snowstorm returned with a vengeance, as if the world itself refused to allow peace without struggle. Streets disappeared beneath thick layers of white, and the wind screamed like an untamed spirit through the trees. Inside the diner, the warmth felt fragile, a thin barrier between safety and chaos. Emily had stayed late to close up, unaware that tonight would become the night everything changed. Mark arrived just as she finished wiping down the last table. His coat was dusted with snow, hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were steady, focused on her with a quiet urgency. "Emily," he called softly, though the voice carried over the din of the storm outside. She turned, startled, the tension of the day etched into her posture. "Mark." "It's late," she whispered, worry and fatigue warring in her expression. "I need to talk to you," he said, stepping closer. "It's important." Her heart raced, not from fear but from anticipation. Something about the way he looked at her, steady yet vulnerable, broke down a wall she hadn't realized she was still holding up. They moved outside together, into the snow-covered streets. The storm hit them fully, snowflakes whipping around them, biting and cold. Emily shivered, instinctively pulling her coat tighter. Mark, seeing this, immediately wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, sheltering her from the wind. "I can't do this alone anymore," he confessed, voice raw. "I've spent so long building walls I thought would protect me, protect everyone around me. But they've only kept me frozen. And now, I don't want to be frozen anymore. Not from fear, not from grief, not from love." Emily felt tears sting her eyes. Her own walls, built from years of pain and insecurity, wavered under the weight of his honesty. She wanted to retreat, wanted to protect herself, but the warmth radiating from him, the sincerity in his words, made her pause. I've always been afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Afraid that if I let someone in, they'll leave. Afraid that I'm not enough. Afraid that I'll get hurt." Mark cupped her face in his hands, letting his thumbs brush her frozen cheeks, creating warmth that had nothing to do with the storm. "You are enough, Emily, more than enough. And I'm not going anywhere, I promise." For a long moment, the world felt suspended. Snow swirled around them, wind howling, yet within that circle of closeness there was silence, safety, and something more powerful, hope. Then, unexpectedly, a group of bikers thundered past, engines roaring, breaking the stillness of the storm. Mark instinctively stepped in front of Emily, protective. But something in the scene struck them both, chaos outside, warmth inside, fear and courage coexisting in the same moment. Emily laughed softly, a sound that startled even her. "You've got a dramatic life, Mark Tanner," she said, the tension easing from her shoulders. "And you've got a dramatic heart, Emily," he replied, smiling through the cold. "But maybe that's what makes life worth living." They walked together, hand in hand, snow crunching under their boots. The storm, once a symbol of isolation and fear, now felt like a backdrop to their resilience, a testament to how love could thaw even the coldest of hearts. That night, as they returned to the diner to gather their things, the town seemed transformed. Snow still blanketed the streets, but the neon signs glowed brighter, reflections dancing across the ice like shards of hope. Patrons and passers-by caught glimpses of them, two people who had faced the storm both literally and metaphorically, and felt something in that image, courage, love, and the possibility of second chances. Mark finally spoke the words he had withheld for so long, words that carried all the weight of past grief and present hope. "Emily, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: I want to face it with you." Her eyes shone with tears, but her smile was unshakable. "And I want to face it with you too." The storm began to relent, the snow softening to gentle flakes, the wind losing its bite. It was as if the world itself acknowledged the courage it takes to be vulnerable, the bravery required to trust again. In that moment, the past, with all its pain, no longer held power over them. What remained was the raw, undeniable truth of connection, understanding, and love. They stood together under the dim glow of the diner's neon sign, hearts aligned, ready to face whatever life threw their way. The snowstorm, which had once symbolized isolation, fear, and uncertainty, had become a testament to survival, resilience, and the warmth that comes from shared vulnerability. And in that warmth, Mark and Emily discovered something timeless. That love, even after loss, even after fear, could awaken frozen hearts, ignite hope, and create a bond unbroken by the storms of life. The storm had passed. The streets, once cloaked in white chaos, now shimmered under the soft glow of morning sunlight, each snowflake reflecting a fragile brilliance. Townspeople emerged from their homes, blinking against the clarity, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place within the walls of a small diner. But Mark and Emily knew everything had changed. They stood together outside the diner, shoulders brushing, hands entwined. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of weeks of struggle, fear, and vulnerability. Every glance shared between them was a silent acknowledgement the past could not define the future. Loss, pain, and heartbreak were chapters, but they were not the entire story. Mark inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the heaviness of grief pressing down on him. Instead, there was a lightness, a fragile but undeniable hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be more than survival. It could be joy. "Emily," he said softly, voice steady. "I don't know what comes next, but I do know this. Whatever storms come our way, I want to face them with you." Emily's eyes glistened, the sunlight catching the tears that she refused to hide. Her smile was radiant, not just for him, but for herself. "And I want that too," she whispered. "I want to live again, not just exist. I want to trust again, not just fear." For a moment, they simply stood there, letting the silence stretch between them, not awkward, but sacred. The world felt still, holding its breath, as if acknowledging the courage it took to step forward after so much hesitation, after so much loss. Their story had not been easy. They had faced fear, grief, and misunderstanding. They had wrestled with shadows that lingered long after the initial pain, and yet, in confronting these obstacles, they had discovered something profound, that love is not just passion or romance. Love is patience. Love is courage. Love is showing up even when the heart trembles. As they walked hand in hand toward the town square, the world seemed transformed. Every familiar corner, every street lamp, every cafe window seemed brighter, warmer, infused with possibility. Life had not magically become perfect. The bills, the responsibilities, and the unpredictable challenges remained, but Mark and Emily now faced them with something far more powerful than fear: connection, trust, companionship, the knowledge that even in the harshest winters, warmth can be found. Later, they returned to the diner, this time not as strangers seeking refuge, but as partners embracing life's unpredictability together. The staff greeted them with smiles, perhaps sensing the quiet victory of two souls who had dared to be vulnerable and honest. Patrons looked on, inspired by the sight of courage meeting compassion, by the proof that hearts thought frozen could indeed thaw. Emily looked at Mark across the counter, her expression soft but steady. "You know," she said, "storms don't last forever, but I think we've learned to weather them." Mark chuckled softly, brushing a stray snowflake from her hair. "And when storms return, we won't just survive, we'll face them together." The sun climbed higher, melting the snow into sparkling streams that reflected the optimism that had taken root in their hearts. They stepped outside once more, pausing at the edge of the town square. For a moment, it felt as if the universe had conspired to reward bravery, the courage to face fear, to trust, to love. In that quiet moment, both understood an essential truth: life would always present challenges, grief would always leave echoes, and fear would occasionally whisper. But none of it could overshadow the power of human connection. They had found warmth in each other's presence, hope in shared understanding, and the promise that, no matter the storms ahead, they would never face them alone. And so, hand in hand, hearts aligned, they stepped forward into the new day. The storm had ended, but the story of their courage, their love, and their second chance had only just begun. For those willing to trust, to open their hearts, and to embrace vulnerability, life had a way of surprising, even in the coldest, darkest winters, by delivering warmth, joy, and a love that could heal even the deepest wounds. In the end, the diner remained, a humble beacon in a small town, but its true significance was larger than brick and mortar. It had become the place where two broken hearts learned to beat again, where fear was met with courage, and where the extraordinary beauty of second chances revealed itself. The snow would melt, storms would come and go, but some truths endure. Love, when nurtured with patience and honesty, can thaw even the iciest hearts. And hope, when seized in the quiet courage of a single moment, can last a lifetime. Mark and Emily walked into that lifetime together, hearts no longer frozen, ready to face whatever the future held, together.